Mud caked his face like war paint. The thick, pungent slurry clung to his beard, filled his ears, crusted against the rims of his eyelids. He didn't blink. He hadn't moved in hours. Not since the last patrol passed just 30 meters from his position. Booted feet brushing against foliage while automated scanners buzzed and hummed above their heads. The elites relied on their machines. That was their mistake. Jack Maloran, called Sign Deadeye, lay on his stomach in a shallow depression carved between roots and fungus, utterly still. His rifle, nearly as long as it was tall, sat nestled into the crook of his shoulder, supported by a makeshift bipod fashioned from scavenged polysteel and earth-made rope. No lasers, no scopes, just good old iron sights and a long barrel wrapped in burlap and grease. To breathe, he exhaled slowly through a reed he'd split in half, hidden in the crook of a moss-covered branch. Gorvax 3's air was humid, toxic in long doses, and swarming with aggressive microspores. He'd already lost 3 layers of skin on his forearm. Didn't matter. All that mattered was a shot. Through the haze of biosteam and filtered light, he could see the target platform, elevated, reinforced, guarded by ZHYR commandos who looked like insectal gods, 7 feet tall, clad in mirrored armor that shimmered like oil under a blue sun. The one in the center, the one flanked by ornate banners and ceremonial weapon drones, was a prize. Captain Threxel. Jack's breath slowed even further. Threxel was known across the consortium as a conqueror of primitive worlds, a commander who relished extermination campaigns. His name echoed through refugee camps on Mars, whispered in rage across resistance bunkers. Now he stood within Jack's sights, relaxed and smug, untouchable. Jack's finger hovered near the trigger, not quite touching. He whispered without turning, "Wind." Behind him, buried beneath leaves and covered with a sense of dampening net, Sergeant Mason Rell responded in a gravelly murmur, crosswind slight northeast. 10 clicks out, 2-point drop. Temp rising. 2 degrees since dawn. Roger. Jack made the mental adjustments. No AI calculations. No predictive algorithms. Just instinct, math, and years of muscle memory. The rifle was human-made, forged in a lab beneath the Rockies using a blend of iron, tungsten, and spite. It fired 19 millimeters kinetic slugs, chemical propellant-based, and capable of ripping through flesh, metal, and arrogance. He closed his left eye, exhaled, and counted heartbeats. 4, 3, 2. He squeezed. The crack of the shot was thunder. Not quiet, not stealthy. It echoed across the jungle, like a slap across a face. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, digging bone against dirt. The bullet flew, not guided, not curved by tech, but direct, honest, furious. The slug hit Threxel dead center mid-sentence. 1 second the alien was pontificating over strategy. The next, his entire upper torso vanished in a mist of blood, chitin, and shattered armor. His guards froze, as did the drones. Confusion. No alarms. No warnings. Just a corpse on a platform, and no digital explanation for how it got that way. Jack rolled onto his back immediately, sliding downslope through muck and roots, his rifle already holstered across his spine. Time to move. Mason was already in motion, tossing detonation beads into the underbrush. They weren't explosives, just sonic disruptors, salvaged ZHYR tech tuned to mimic gunfire at 10-second intervals. Ghosts in the jungle. Misdirection. They sprinted through vines and thermal clouds, breath controlled, steps light. Every inch of movement had been pre-planned. They had 20 seconds before the consortium's grid realigned. Status? Jack asked, ducking beneath a low-hanging root. ZHYR just went blind. Sensors scrambled. They'll blame the fog again. They moved in silence after that. 10 minutes of perfect evasion through mud trails, fungal groves, and vine-choked riverbanks. When they reached the fallback tunnel, a collapsed mining shaft just wide enough for 2 human shoulders, Jack finally spoke again. That was for Outpost 12. Mason grunted. And for Reynolds. And no Ran. And all the civvies he flushed out of the damn hab-domes. They crawled into darkness. Behind them, sirens began to scream across the canopy, deep and confused. Above the treetops, Consortium patrol craft zipped into erratic formation, scanning for threats they didn't understand. In command centers, ZHYR officers pounded holographic displays, demanding answers from systems that only returned static. And in one encrypted sector of the interstellar web, a single incident report began to propagate. High value loss. Trajectory unknown. Origin organic. Kinetic impact. No one in the ZHYR consortium had used the phrase kinetic impact in decades. Down in the shaft, Jack unrolled a foil pack of water paste and sipped. Mason checked their map. Next target's further inland. Another commander. Rumor is he's part of the same squad that hit the Martian colonies. Jack nodded slowly. His eyes were distant. Somewhere between memory and calculation. They'll send something nastier this time, not just patrols. They're already mocking us on interfeeds. One ZHYR called you a relic with a toy. Jack smiled. Just once. It didn't reach his eyes. Good, he muttered. Let them keep laughing. Above them, high in orbit, consortium warships shifted position. Somewhere on the bridge of the command carrier Vigilant Dominion, Archon Valeth watched footage from Gorvax 3 on a glowing screen. He replayed the moment again and again. The death of Threxel, the blur of something impossible. He turned to his tacticians and uttered one word in their clicking dialect. Hunters. Then he pointed toward the human sector of space. Bring me a skull. Back in the jungle, Jack leaned against the damp stone of the shaft wall, eyes closed but alert. His hands cradled his rifle, not as a soldier holds a weapon, but as an artist holds a brush. He knew what would come next. He wasn't a fool. The elites would escalate. He'd be ready. Let them send hunters. He was the one they'd never see coming. The hunter arrived on Gorvax 3 during a blackdown storm. No transport signatures. No descent trails. One moment the sky roiled with clouds, the next a sleek obsidian drop vessel lay half submerged in a marsh, steaming as if born from the planet's own molten core. The creatures that watched from the treetops, a species too primitive for galactic classification, vanished into the canopy. Even they knew something unnatural had entered the jungle. Viacor stepped into the mire, like it welcomed him. 7 feet tall, built like a war golem, his armor was fused to his flesh, biosynthetic musculature twitching beneath dark plates etched with kill runes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His reputation whispered louder than any broadcast. Former arena champion, ZHYR executioner, a lead of the Kale Syndic. He'd been activated only once before, on Varnes 5, when the automated fleet failed to suppress a planetary rebellion, and ZHYR pride demanded a surgical purge. He hunted every rebel leader down in 10 days, left a pyramid of skulls as a message. Now he was on Gorvax 3, and he was hunting one man. Jack Maloran was already moving. He hadn't seen the hunter arrive, but he felt it, like a chill in the marrow, like the jungle holding its breath. He and Mason had relocated deeper into the southeast quadrant, where thick mist rose from geothermal vents and the terrain became a shifting mosaic of tunnels, pits, and root systems. Mason was quiet. He'd grown quieter each day. Something about the jungle was draining him. How sure are we about the intel? He asked while checking the spring tension tripwires they'd placed behind their camp. Sure enough, Jack replied. Encrypted chatter spiked. One name repeated. Viacor. Mason grimaced. Thought that was a myth. Not anymore. They didn't build elaborate defenses. No bunkers. No turrets. Jack knew better. Viacor wouldn't be outmaneuvered by hardware. What he respected was unpredictability. So Jack offered it. They split up. Jack took the river path, a narrow trench of mud and slick rock that wound between cliff ridges. Mason circled wide, rigging fallback points and noise traps with stripped-down parts from salvage drones. It wasn't much, but they didn't need much. They only needed one opportunity. Viacor followed the trail like a ghost. Not one tripwire triggered. Not one decoy fooled him. He didn't see Jack, but he knew he was near. His visor flashed thermal scans through layers of foliage, tracing recent chemical residue from gun oil and synthetic sweat. He picked up vibrations in the soil, subtle irregularities left by boot treads too deliberate to be native fauna. He adjusted the dampening system on his boots, shifting to full stealth mode. Then he crouched, placed 2 fingers in mud, and whispered in his own tongue, "You've earned my walk." Jack was ahead, crouched behind a stone formation shaped like a jagged fong. He'd chosen it because it funneled wind and sound, like a natural amplifier. He placed a crude metal disc into a notch carved in the stone wall. It was linked to a directional sound emitter he'd salvaged from a ZHYR communicator. He pressed a button. A recording played, Mason's voice shouting a curse, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle. The jungle answered like a storm had passed through. VA Corps responded instantly, pivoting to the west and charging to the fern-choked path. His shoulder-mounted auto-targeter snapped open, scanning for muzzle flash. He didn't slow down. He didn't hesitate. That was mistake number 1. As he moved to the western path, the earth gave way. Jack had mapped that sinkhole days ago. It looked solid from above, roots crusted with clay, stable enough to fool a scanner. VA Corps dropped 6 meters into the pit, hitting hard. Not enough to kill him, but enough to stagger. Mistake number 2 was assuming Jack would wait for a clean shot. Jack was already moving. He slid down the slope, not toward the edge but the far side, where he'd stashed his second rifle, shorter, with a reinforced chamber and a slug built for brute force. He found the lip of the sinkhole and looked down. VA Corps had already gotten up. He stood in the pit, like a monster out of myth, eyes glowing behind his mask, chest rising with inhuman steadiness. Jack didn't speak. He just pulled the trigger. The round hit VA Corps dead center, blasting armor shards into the air. The hunter stumbled, bled, but didn't fall. Jack fired again. The second shot struck the side of VA Corps' helmet, breaking a piece off and exposing raw skin beneath, thick gray, veined like stone. VA Corps lunged. Jack had expected that too. He let the rifle fall, rolled back, and triggered the trap he'd buried beneath the moss. It wasn't an explosion. It was worse. A flash bomb tuned to blind multispectral vision and short-circuit neural links. Not lethal, but for someone as tech-integrated as VA Corps, disorienting beyond reason. The hunter screamed, more out of rage than pain, and Jack capitalized. Knife in hand, he dropped into the pit, boots connected with the back of VA Corps' knees. He jammed the blade into the alien's neck joint and twisted. Blood poured, black and hot. VA Corps swung wildly, catching Jack's shoulder with a backhand strong enough to crack bone. Jack hit the wall, dazed but conscious. VA Corps staggered, stumbled, and fell. Jack didn't move for a while. He watched the body, waited. Only when he saw the light fade from VA Corps' cybernetic eye did he finally speak into his comm. "Mason, target's down." The line crackled. "Confirm?" Jack stood, favoring his right side. Close and personal. Real messy. But yeah, confirmed. There was a long pause before Mason answered again. "Damn, you actually did it." Jack didn't respond. He looked down at the body, the symbol of elite supremacy, this engineered god, and felt nothing but the dull ache of another mission done. But far above, in the data chambers of Consortium, the kill report triggered an automated alert. Not just that VA Corps had died, but how he died. Manual weapon. Proximity combat. No AI. The report was tagged with a rare classification. Unanticipated human adversary. Lethality anomaly. Jack didn't know it, but his name had just entered a dozen restricted watch lists across the galaxy. He did, however, know what came next. There'd be more. More hunters. Smarter ones. Or worse. "They're not going to stop," Mason said through the comm. Jack looked at his bloody hands, his cracked ribs, the jungle mist curling like breath around his boots. "No," he said softly, "but neither are we." He picked up his rifle and disappeared into the green. The vigilant Dominion loomed above Gorvax, three like a silent god, cloaked in shadow, immune to the planet's chaos. It was the pride of the ZHYR Consortium, an orbital fortress large enough to eclipse moons, its hull laced with interlocking plates of plasma-forged alloy, weapon systems tuned to vaporize cities. Within its command center, 12 of the most powerful military minds in the galaxy convened beneath the domed atrium of stars. None of them knew a Terran was already inside. Jack Maloran had entered the beast through fire and wreckage. Days ago, he buried himself inside the twisted chassis of a downed ZHYR dropship, sealing his body in between cracked coolant lines and shredded reactor coils. The jungle had swallowed the wreck hole, but ZHYR salvage units recovered it. As expected, they never left tech behind, not even when it was laced with human rage. Now Jack lay prone within a cramped ventilation shaft 2 meters above the command council chamber. His breath was measured, shallow, filtered through a rag damp with oil to muffle sound. Beneath him, the generals argued. Archon Valeth paced with serpentine grace, his ceremonial robes trailing behind him like a cloud of smoke. His voice was composed, but disdain dripped from every syllable. We've lost 6 forward outposts, a dozen sub-commanders, all to one man with a slug thrower. Are we seriously treating this relic as a threat? He's not just a man, his strategist Kareth. He's a symbol now. Entire resistance cells are organizing under his name. Then we erase the name, Valeth said, tapping a clawed finger on the glowing war table. We crush Earth, reduce their systems to ash, end their myth. A murmur of approval spread through the room. Jack remained silent. He was counting the seconds between Valeth's turns, each pacing step mapped in his mind. He'd studied the chamber's layout from a stolen blueprint, knew the angles, the light curvature from the artificial dome, the mild spin of the station's orbit that would alter bullet trajectory ever so slightly. He unwrapped the pieces of his rifle slowly, methodically. No sound, no wasted motion. For components forged from scavenged metal, each part oiled and etched with notches, one for every mission. One round sat in the velvet interior of his kit, handcrafted, armor-piercing, stabilized in atmosphere, fired only once in testing. He slid the barrel into place and adjusted the iron sights. His finger rested on the trigger guard. Not yet. Patience wasn't a strategy. It was his creed. Below, Valeth stood still, arms raised in front of the war table. A hologram of Earth hovered above them all, rotating slowly, its blue oceans mocking ZHYR arrogance. We laugh at their bullets, yet they draw blood. We mock their mud-borne tactics, yet they infiltrate our sanctums. Enough. Let us commit to extinction. That was it. The shot. Jack exhaled long and slow. He didn't think of medals or vengeance. Not even Mason, still planet-side, monitoring the comm line for his signal. He thought only of stillness. And then he squeezed. The crack split the air like a whip of thunder. The rifle slammed against his shoulder, recoiling with intimate violence. The slug exited the vent slot in silence, then roared through the atrium like a comet. It struck Archon Valeth cleanly in the temple, boring through his skull and exiting with enough kinetic energy to shatter the crystalline floor beneath him. The Archon collapsed in a heap, his limbs spasming once, then still. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chamber was dead silent. No screams, no shouts. Just disbelief thick in the air. Then chaos erupted. Alarms blared, lights shifted to crimson. Security drones rose from recessed panels, scanning the air. Commanders scattered, some ducking beneath the war table, others shouting over one another in rapid ZHYR dialects. But Jack was already gone. He rolled backward from the shaft and slipped into a utility tunnel, feet landing softly on polymer grating. The rifle was disassembled even as he moved. Each piece vanished into hidden compartments in his uniform. He pressed a beacon on his wrist once. Just once. A signal. To Mason. It meant Phase 2. He descended quickly, turning down a narrow service corridor lit only by faint green strips. At least 5 levels below the chamber, the ZHYR kept their backup power node, redundant, rarely guarded, but Jack had scoped it in advance. He reached the panel, knelt, and produced a compact charge, a brute force EMP warhead, scavenged from a mining laser and modified with spike delay. He planted it against the primary capacitor, whispered, "For everyone you silenced," and flipped the activation switch. Then he ran. The explosion was muted, almost polite, but the effect wasn't. Half the station blacked out. Command decks flickered. Surveillance arrays failed. Security routines collapsed mid-sweep. Holograms vanished. Doors sealed and locked without direction. The vigilant Dominion, a weapon of perfect structure and command, descended into digital confusion. Jack sprinted through the chaos, slipping past guards confused by their own equipment failures. One fired at him too late. Another was felled with a silent blade through the ribs. He reached the escape pod bay and sealed himself inside the smallest capsule, a one-seat evac pod built for emergency ejection. The biometric controls protested his presence, so he tore out the override cable and hot-wired it manually, bypassing 3 layers of genetic failsafes. The pod fired, launched from the belly of the Dominion like a disowned secret. It burned through atmosphere, its hull glowing red with friction. From orbit, it would have looked like a meteor. Inside, Jack sat still, bruised, bleeding, alive. He didn't smile. Not yet. His mind raced with the next move. The war wasn't over. Earth wasn't safe. The Consortium still held dozens of systems in its claws. Killing the Archon wouldn't break their grip, but it cracked their illusion. He knew what the ZHYR feared most now. Not weapons, not war, but humiliation. And that was exactly what he delivered. The pod smashed into the jungle near the equator of Gorvax 3, embedding itself in a wet crater of moss and stone. By the time search drones arrived, it was empty. No blood trail, no body. Just a crude phrase scratched into the hull with a carbon blade, written in twisted ZHYR symbols. You mocked the shot. Now fear the marksman. Word spread fast. Even across systems, even through censorship, the story leaked. The man who killed the Archon. The Terran who ghosted into the Dominion and walked out again. Some called him Death's Apprentice. Others just called him Deadeye. Across frontier worlds, humans began training not with drones, but rifles. And somewhere, deep in another jungle, in a world not yet marked on any map, Jack knelt once more in mud, scanning the horizon through iron sights, waiting, not for orders, not for peace, but for the next arrogant voice to echo across the stars.